Welcome to The Crack. It is Friday. I hope you're all having a wonderful week. We have a very interesting show for you today, all based around TKO's earning call and particularly some comments made by Mark Shapiro, the president of TKO Holdings, regarding a particular collaboration with the Saudis and a boxing league, which will be, should be, according to the call, rolled out during this year. A very interesting time, of course. Big fights this weekend, particularly in Ireland. Donovan v. Crocker. I mean, some of you might not be interested in that. There's also Gervonta Davis, and there's another amazing UFC card, which the lads covered in great detail yesterday. So before we get into this business, I want to invite my brilliant guests. You know them and love them. Chuck Mindenhall, Ben Fowlkes. Lads, how are you? Chuck.
Hey.
Baseball cap gone. Back to the traditional Chuck Mindenhall hat today, I see.
I just grabbed one off the rack. You know how it is, Petesy. Kind of on the fly, man. So I thought I'd spiffy things up for you a little bit. What do you think?
You look fantastic. You look absolutely beautiful. Ben,
Good,
folks, you've returned to us this week. Thank you very much. People were missing you. People were aggressive with me. They were saying, I thought Ben would be here regularly. Now he's off gallivanting at somewhere along the coast, it seemed like. Thank you for blessing us with your presence.
Yeah, I was indeed gallivanting. That's the only word to describe what I was doing. Listen, man, when you live in the dark northern climate of Montana, you get to late February and it almost breaks your spirit. You got to get out of there. I went to sunny San Diego, sat there drinking a Pacifico, watching a spring training baseball game, and suddenly I feel like, you know what? I can keep trudging on another day.
Did you think for just one second, like, why did I leave? Didn't you go to school down there?
Yeah, I went to San Diego, the San Diego State University.
Yeah.
Go Aztecs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know why I left, but it's nice to come back every once in a while.
That sounds like pure Americana, by the way. I don't know what a Pacifico is. I would definitely like the taste of one, I assume. But that just watching this baseball training game, you said, unbelievable. This reminds me of a script from some kind of movie I watched in my teens. That's beautiful, man.
Baseball training game, he says.
Yeah.
You sound like my girlfriend who kept referring to it as practice. She was like, "Did you want to watch one of those practice games?" And I was just like,
"What's wrong with spring training, Ben? Come on, it's part of our
watch
fabric."
Spring training, see a guy who's going to be bagging groceries in a couple weeks, give up a 2-run home run, eat yourself a fish taco, and you feel pretty good.
I'm there for it all, apart from the baseball. As I've told you before, it's the last American sport I can't truly embrace. We've been dipping our toe in the hockey with the Four Nations, but unfortunately, we have to talk about another sport today. two different sports, an amalgam of sports, if you will, sporting giants, if you will. We saw Ben's article earlier this week on the aftermath of this earnings call, but for those of you who haven't heard what Mark Shapiro said, again, the president of TKO Holdings, I believe on Air Jordan, all the way in Florida this week. We won't say why he's there. But anyway, Jordan, if you could bless us with that beautiful audio, I would be very grateful.
Make no mistake about it, our core business is UFC and WWE. And we're focused on the integration of IMG, On Location, and PBR, both as standalone businesses, but also to help power and fuel our two battleships that are UFC and WWE. When it comes to other opportunities, we intend to be selective, disciplined, thoughtful, but we will consider, other opportunities to create long-term value for our shareholders as they present themselves, but they must be value accretive. When you look at boxing, it checks the boxes of all of that. It's thoughtful. It's the right strategic place for us to be. We have experts in Nick Khan and Dana White, among others, that can drive that business. We can be selective in terms of how we participate, and whatever we do, we will not take risk, and it will definitely be value accretive. I would tell you that there's still strong interest in the sport around the globe, and particularly in the U.S. And there's a desire to have it back in the forefront of the American sports ecosystem. It's just been broken for too long. It's been fragmented. It's been poorly managed, and we think we can do a lot with it. What I would tell you in terms of our specific opportunities, which we've spoken to, everybody knows we're in talks with the Saudis, but to give you a little more color, I will tell you that we are close on an agreement with the Saudis on the creation of a boxing league where we, TKO, would be the producer, the promoter, and responsible for all day-to-day operations of the venture whereby we would receive a fee of 10 million plus. Again, we're not putting any money in. We're not putting any capital in. We're not on the hook for any CapEx.
Well, there you have it. Mark Shapiro, it seems, ending the is it nearly 8-year quest for Dana White to get himself involved in.
Probably has
boxing.
been that long since he wore the first Zuffa boxing shirt. Remember that way back in the day?
Oh yeah.
I think it is. I think I literally saw Jedi Goodman in the aftermath of this. He added one of his tweets to a long thread he has about everything Dana has ever said about getting into boxing. And I believe the first one, you're exactly right, was Zuffa Boxing 2017. It seems it's about to happen. Ben, you wrote about this for Yahoo Sports, our wonderful website. Tell me, what do you think this would look like? And I know it's very hard to try to imagine right now based on the few bits of information we have, but you know, with TKO being this promoter, they're handling the day-to-day, all this kind of stuff. Is this going to be a UFC product, essentially, with just boxing instead of MMA?
You know, what I thought was really interesting about Mark Shapiro's comments there was what he stressed, the things that he really wanted to make clear. And again, this isn't a call to investors to sort of assure them that, you know, we are doing something that is going to be good for your money and our money, and not Dana White doing his thing that he likes to do where he makes big promises at times because he's a fight promoter. He's just a born and bred fight promoter. So he's always going to sort of overpromise. You got to do things a little differently when you're actually talking to investors. There are actual laws about what you can say and what you can promise them. So the things that he stressed there are, for one thing, we're absolutely not taking any risk. We're not putting any money into this. We are only making money for doing something. And what we are doing is fairly limited. Like it says, we'll be the promoter. We'll present this stuff. We'll be responsible for sort of the look and feel of these events and as a show, but we won't be the ones putting up the money to pay the fighters, to you know, get the TV time, to whatever we're going to do there. We won't be at risk if it completely fails. It's the Saudis' money that we're playing with, basically, and we make a fee of, he said, 10 million plus. He also went on to say that they would have some built-in equity in the actual venture over time. I think he said over a 5-year span, depending on it meeting certain goals, certain performance goals. So they could own a piece of it if it does well enough. But basically saying, we're going to get into boxing, but if it turns out to be a total disaster, we will have lost nothing. We're going to make some money either way. It's also really interesting to me that he kept specifying boxing league. That was the actual phrase he used, boxing league, which, you know, you'll recall the UFC would go to great lengths at times when it was in front of congressional committees talking about potential expansion of the Ali Act into MMA, where a phrase like league was one they really wanted to stay away from because of the connotations that it brings. And so it's interesting to me to hear him kind of talk about, hey, there's a big desire for boxing, which there is. There's a lot more desire, and you hear a lot more about boxing now in North America than you did even 5 years ago. And yet also to turn around and be like, but it's broken and it needs us to fix it, you know? And especially that word that he used, fragmented. It's too fragmented. What he's saying is we should own it all. If we could own it all and own the sport the way we do with the UFC, and allowing us to kind of keep all the money and dictate the pay, then the sport itself would be better off, which I'm sure there's a lot of boxers who are making big money right now who are wondering, would it though? Would it?
Yeah, the broken thing is what gets me. It's because I've never really, I mean, I understand the sentiment, but this is something that Dana has been hammering home the whole time. And it's something that the UFC has kind of made part of their success story, is that they were doing everything that boxing wasn't, that they were going to be everything that boxing, you know, everything they watched, what was failing in boxing. This is how we created the UFC. We're going to do this other thing. But it being broken, like calling it broken at this point in time, which, by the way, has a very specific timing to a certain president and everything that's going on around in America. But to say it's broken right now when you've got basically the Saudi Arabia, the Riyadh season, and all of these boxers, I feel like they're probably now, like, who's paying attention to a lot of these boxers, say, a couple of years ago? I mean, these guys right now, I feel like they're getting equal play, even within the MMA sphere that we mostly populate. they're getting play all over. We know prospects and everything coming up now. It's probably healthier than it's been in decades. Just in terms of the pure perception of it and, excitement generated around it and all that stuff. So to use the word broken, fragmented, I understand that you're kind of latching on to something, but you're also introducing yourselves as the entity to come in and fix it. And that creates, right, the idea that, oh, let's see what they can do with it. It opens up that pathway.
Yeah, I think also the point you make where they are claiming boxing is broken and we're going to fix it. The argument that you could make about the state of boxing now, and that I've heard a lot of people make, is like, hey, that it's not necessarily a long-term fix that we're seeing. It's Saudi money propping it up. But the UFC's or TKO's plan for how they're going to get into boxing is also Saudi money propping it up. It's what he's saying is we're not going to take any risks. The Saudis are putting up all the money. We're making money. And we might make more if it does really well. Like, you're still a part of the same system there. And whenever people try to claim, and Dana White has made this claim a lot, where he's just like, hey, these people in boxing are not making way better money than UFC fighters. It's telling that you always see UFC and MMA fighters want to go to boxing, and you never see it the other way around. And that tells you who's making more money right there.
Petesy, remind me real quick. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. Ben, I don't remember if you're on the show or not, but we mentioned
probably off gallivanting.
Yeah, he was gallivanting. We had you mentioned the top 100 paid athletes.
Yes.
And we went through and we're like, okay, how many MMA fighters are on that list? Do you recall?
Yes. There was 6 boxers, and the lowest ranked of all the boxers was Inoue.
Yeah.
And he had made 45 million. So that's
But how many MMA guys?
0.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That thing changes. That you know what I mean? Like these are really the implications. It's like where boxing is it's where boxing is, and I know we're going to get into the Ollie Act and all of this stuff, but like where it's at provides that opportunity for 6 different guys, including Inoue, who hasn't even fought in North America in several years, back to when he was basically a no-name on the circuit. I mean, he was just a rising fighter at that point. So, I mean, when you think about the kind of what does this mean, or when you kind of do the domino effect of anything that we're kind of contemplating with what all this means, that's what it comes down to is boxing right now. You can make a lot of money. People want to go to boxing for that reason, including our top draws in the UFC. But that changes, right? That's going to change if TKO gets a hold of it. If TKO becomes, and it becomes like more of a monopoly, and boxing becomes part of TKO, and there's some amendments to the Ollie Act, all this stuff. I mean, who knows where it goes, but that's really what's at stake.
It's interesting you bring up that list, Chuck, because, at the end of 2024, we're all talking about Alex Pereira, what he's done. This is like a perfect year for an MMA fighter. 3 fights, 3, like stepping up on short notice for 2 of them. And then he's not even clocking that kind of money. Like the superstar of the year, the guy you would expect would be earning enough to be on a list like this. Nowhere near it. Well, I don't know if he was nowhere near it, but he wasn't on it, certainly. Interesting what you said at the very top there, Ben. You said that you feel as though they want to take over boxing in the same way as they have with MMA, meaning TKO. Is this essentially the precursor for an attempt to take over combat sports? Like, if they have boxing, they have MMA already, they have professional wrestling with WWE. Like, those 2 companies, UFC, WWE, they own those industries. Is this what we're going to try and see TKO and the Saudis attempt to do with this boxing league?
Well, it does seem like they're at least testing the waters on that. This is sort of feels like the most definitive we've ever heard anybody, other than Dana White making just big promoter promises, them saying we're very close. I think he said awfully close at one point. He said that earlier this week. TKO had sent a delegation over to London to meet with a Saudi delegation to talk about it and sort of try to finalize a deal. If all that is true, and again, this is an earnings call, so it kind of better be true, that is a lot closer and a lot closer to something concrete than anything we've heard before about Dana White's many promises to get into boxing. And the fact that they're saying we're going to get in it without any risk, we're just going to make money to put on the events and sort of use our expertise as combat sports live event producers, that tells you like we're trying it out. the Saudis are willing to put up the money. We're willing to try it out. Where it goes from there probably depends how well it does. I also think it depends on some of the stuff that may or may not happen with the Ali Act.
Yeah, the Ali Act, we're definitely going to get into that because there was some comments made about that particular act, and it's something that has been talked about for a very long time within MMA, what impact it would have on the sport, etc. But just before that, because we're talking about this takeover element, Chuck, what do you think the likes of Top Rank, Matchroom, these other promoters will think of this? You know, like they've all been in bed with Saudis to a degree, like
Sure.
to a very large degree, but we haven't had this kind of formal announcement of we're with this guy now, we're doing this together, this big boxing league together. Like it feels like very much TKO have planted their flag in Saudi Arabia there with Turkey. You know, like if this is essentially a takeover, I'd be very worried if I was one of the Matchroom guys, say.
Well, if everything stays intact as it is right now, you know, I don't think there would be much to it. But the thing is, so they mentioned these 4 mega events, right? That
Yes.
may or may not fall into the boxing league, but could just be one-offs or could just be whatever. Now, if you're talking about, you know, Top Rank or you're talking about Matchroom or something in that respect, obviously this is where they can play ball together, right? Like I think that this is the type of thing where the entities can come together. It's very interesting to me that Alexander, and I mean, honestly, the fight game kind of makes you into a conspiracy theorist at some point because you just start reading into everything. But when Alexander Usyk was speaking and he said, there's 2 fights I'd like Danny Dubois, and then I would like to fight maybe Alex Pereira. You think, oh my God, not this again. It can't happen. It can't happen because the UFC would have to sign off on it. But there's this little twinkle in his eye, and I don't know to what kind of extent that people talk behind the scenes, what they know is going on. But you know what would be facilitated if, you know, TKO is in there and they have a super fight, mega fight, whatever they're calling it, like series, that type of thing, right? Like you could make that kind of fight. So in some ways, rather than losing your superstar talent in the UFC to like some big proximity, like maybe Francis Ngannou, right, going over and maybe even paving the way to an extent of showing what might happen if you paired up some of these fighters, you now have a platform to actually do that and make it feasible, right? Like you could just say like, yes, let's do Alex Pereira. Like you could make that fight. That's kind of one of the strange, you know, things within this that, you know, piques your interest a little bit.
Yeah, especially in terms of payments, right? Like if you like this, we can go down so many different alleyways with this thing. But like, I mean, if you have Usyk, right? Just for example, that fight you mentioned, Usyk v Pereira. Like we have a situation where we think that John Jones has asked for a certain amount of money to make this Aspinall fight happen. It hasn't happened. But then at the same time, if you have TKO involved with this organization, this boxing organization, where Usyk's fighting Pereira and possibly getting paid astronomical amounts of money to fight him, if we're to use Conor and Mayweather as a guide, surely that will lead to a lot of complications within the other organization, where the UFC fighters are looking at Pereira and going, well, you know, what's this doing with our bottom line? When's our bottom line going to move because of this, right?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I think though, like for actual fans who are just caring about the fights that they see and aren't that wrapped up in who is getting to keep all the money from these fights,
which is 90%, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a fan of boxing, then you want to see the big boxing matches. You want to see somebody be able to make those fights. And so your question really is, if TKO gets into this, creates some sort of boxing league with the Saudis, will that increase or decrease the likelihood of some of these big fights being made? Because some of the fights we've seen just in the last couple of years, the really big fights, a lot of those probably don't get made, or don't get made when they do, if not for the influx of that money. And you know, you have people who have so much money they can throw it around without worrying about whether they're going to make it back. And a lot of times they don't make it back. And you don't care if you're a fight fan, you just want to see some of those fights. And so it's been sort of a golden age for getting to see these big matchups on time, you know, not years after their expiration date. And so the question is really like whether TKO's involvement is going to help that or hinder that. Because as we've seen, sometimes the UFC's monopoly over the sport has made it in the past at times more likely that you get to see some of those fights because there's just not a whole lot of other options. They have such a strong hand over the fighters that they can sometimes use that to get them into these fights, even if the fighters themselves might prefer to take an easier path. And then at other times, especially the Francis Ngannou situation we've seen where they got pretty comfortable owning the sport and feeling like we don't want fighter pay to creep up. We don't want to set any sort of precedent that somebody can charge us more than is what is on their contract just because it's an especially big fight and they know we're going to make a lot more money. We want everybody to fight for their contracted purses and that's it. And so when you have an opportunity to make a fight like Ngannou versus John Jones, they say, yeah, it'd be a great fight. We'd make a bunch of money, but we're making a bunch of money anyway. We don't need it. We don't want to set that precedent, so we'll let Francis Ngannou walk. And that is like Chuck and Pete, you guys said earlier, the UFC used to make that promise that we are everything that boxing is not. Now let's flip it a little bit, though. And you see, boxing's able to make some of those big fights, and the UFC is more and more leaning on one big fight in the main event, and not such a loaded full fight card, which used to be the promise that they made to fans as a way we're not like boxing.
I do think too, just honestly, man, like what was the end streaming number for the Netflix Mike Tyson and Jake Paul? Like things like this, just so astronomical. At some point, you'd be stupid businessman if you're not looking at that and saying like, guys, maybe we need to rethink things just a little bit. I don't think you have to put on that kind of circus fight, but maybe you relook at things and just our times and what people are into. You know what I mean? And you wonder too. In this new venture, however it looks in the end, if that's kind of another catalyst behind it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's we mentioned the Ali Act earlier. I think one of the things Dana White has cited for many years when he has been considering an entry into boxing, he's mentioned financial constraints and things like this. And a lot of people would point to that and say he is referring to the Ali Act. It does not exist in MMA. I think there's been people saying it would add a lot to the sport. There's a lot of people who said it would take away from the sport. Let's hear what Mark Shapiro had to say about the Ali Act, which is very interesting considering TKO getting involved in this sport.
Look, the Ali Act has flaws. We believe it is actually possible to improve the current system to facilitate more opportunities for boxers and to regrow the sport of boxing in America. That's where we're at. We're not in there, active, inside, pushing, drafting legislation, lobbying legislators. That's ultimately for somebody else. Whether it stays or goes, we think the opportunity for boxing is extraordinary for us in particular. We can talk about that if someone else, pings that question. But it's a clear opportunity, and we are chasing it.
Well, there we go. Not quite doing the lobbying yet, although I think they're in a good position. We can talk about that. Yeah, we can talk about that in a few minutes. But this is wildly significant. Like they're just announcing that we're getting into boxing, and then they're talking about changing one of the biggest things that's happened in boxing over the last 25 years or so. How significant could something like this be, Chuck? Like if they were to come in and some amendments happen to the Ali Act, I feel like that's a pretty strong statement for a young up and comer in the sport, Well,
if you don't want to get into boxing, right? Like you want to get into something, but you just don't like the way they're playing. Well, the entry point becomes when you can change the rules, right? So I feel like that's kind of the situation here. And obviously, like, it was Ari Emanuel, I know, has made something, made comments about, trying to, I don't know if he said repeal, I'm not sure if he used that word, but just amend some of the Ali Act. But obviously, it's in place to protect the boxers, and that's their leverage at this point. If it's federally protected against promoters and corruption and things like that, so to start to reimagine that again, to go backwards in time, you kind of reintroduce the monopoly of boxing. You reintroduce the possibility of corruption, riggings, rankings, all the things that used to basically drive the sport and took the power out of boxers' hands. When we were talking about that, Forbes list or whatever we were talking with the top 100 payouts, that's really where I was going with it. Is I don't think if you're able to just kind of start to make boxing model and make it conform to what you're doing with the UFC, well, that sort of thing is the first to go away. I just don't, like the market gets reestablished and it becomes through that process, it becomes then they are the market. And I think that that's really the things that that jump out. But there's a ton of ramifications on it, man. I mean, you could go down the whole rabbit hole here of all the different things that change with the Ollie Act. If it weren't in place for boxing, it changes everything. It changes the sport as we know it.
Yeah, so we know through a great article Ben Fowlkes wrote there a few years ago on The Athletic that
He
it
doesn't
would
remember.
obviously it would affect the financial disclosure in terms of what's happening on boxing at the moment. It would also, if we're to apply it to MMA, which we aren't talking about, I shouldn't say this, but I mean, say at the moment the promoters aren't in charge of the rankings, the belts, etc.
Mhm.
Like it is there's a body overseeing this kind of thing, which is not what we see in the UFC. It's just crazy to me, Ben, that they're suggesting this because of the implications it would have across the board in the sport. Like, again, I know I asked this question earlier about just TKO saying they're trying to get into business with the Saudis. What do you think about boxers hearing this? Like, boxers have gained quite a bit from this Ali Act. Like, it's been a significant change in the sport. These guys haven't even started this business yet, and they're already talking about something taking away from something that has really helped boxers over the years. That can't be a good first impression to make.
Well, I think the question that I'd be asking if I was a boxer and I hear that is at one point in this call, I don't know if it was part of that answer or not, where Mark Shapiro says that the Ali Act has flaws. And this is sort of the somewhat muted language that Ari Emanuel had used about it, where they're just sort of like, well, we think that the Ali Act could stand some revision, if not, full repeal or whatever. But what I would want to know if I was a boxer is what are the flaws, you think? Like, what are the parts that you would want to see changed? What about it do you think is flawed? Because it's not like the Ali Act, even now, is a foolproof measure or a magic wand for boxers. It still has even the protections it provides, boxers still have some difficulties in getting those protections to apply to them. Like, one of the things the Ali Act does is give you, as a fighter, the chance to demand to see receipts from these events. I want to know how much the promoter made versus how much they paid us. You get to see some of that. You get some sort of protections from what kind of contracts they can draw up. As Chuck mentioned, the big one is they don't get to control the titles, which the UFC does, and which we've seen the UFC really, kind of weaponize that against fighters at times. Do what we want, we'll just take away the belt. We can at any time decide you're not the champion anymore, and we'll make somebody else the champion. They can do whatever they want with it. And so if I'm a fighter, I'm going like, which of these things is it that you think is stopping you from getting into the boxing business or stopping the boxing business from thriving? Like, how are any of these things standing in your way? Because it seems like the unstated part of it, when you hear the guys who want to own these sports say, we think that there are flaws in this legislation, it's like, it's kind of like the people who own the factory saying there's flaws in the legislation that say they have to pay you a minimum wage. That's what I'd be wondering about if I'm the boxers. Like, what about it do you want to change? Because it doesn't seem like any of those changes are going to be good for boxers. And again, the kind of things that boxers have used the LE Act to do, it's not like it's been super successful for every single fighter who has tried to invoke it, but at least gives you a framework. They often end up in the same position that MMA fighters have when, if you want to challenge some kind of contract provision, you want to challenge the UFC or some other promoter on something, what happens is you end up tied up in court for a long time. And the promoter has a bunch of money to pay lawyers for years and to just kind of slow play it, knowing that you don't have that much time to waste. You're a fighter, you have a short athletic prime and a window to make your money. And so they often end up settling because of that. But it at least gives you that framework. It at least says, here's the things you can do and here's the things you can't do in this sport. And, MMA without an Ali Act or without any kind of version for that doesn't even have that. They can do whatever they can get you to sign on. And that's the stuff I'd be worried about if I'm a boxer, because if those people manage to take over that sport and they have friends in the White House who can help them do whatever they want legislatively, then maybe you just lose all the protections you had.
It seems to me, lads, and I'm an outsider, I'm an Irishman here talking to two Americans, and But it would appear to me that Dana White is more politically powerful than he's ever been before. I was reading reports this week, the FBI are talking about UFC training. I feel like every week I'm hearing a new thing about we're trying to make this company a bit more UFC. We had Meta do the same, right? Like I feel like these just an endless slew of these stories. Um, should boxers be worried because they're in a very good place? Like, I mean, if it seems to be, you tell me, Chuck, are they not in a perfect place, like for like legislation and stuff to be changed? I'm not saying it's that easy. You know a guy and off it goes. Maybe it is, but they'd be in a good position to at least lobby for this, even though Mark Shapiro has said on this call that they are not doing that just yet.
I mean, the most Ben mentioned this. The most I don't know the most conspicuous evidence you can find as to what is the more desired place to be is how many fighters from one side, which side looks greener from the other side, right? Like, and I feel like you hear it a lot more from MMA fighters who are like, I'm big in my sport. I comparatively like where I'm at in terms of what I've done for my sport. There's a guy over on the boxing side making, 8 figures for a fight, whatever it is, and I'm not. I'm making 500,000 or whatever it is. You know what I mean? And I think that that's the big thing that catches you. And we've been talking about this for years. I mean, UFC fighters, just not like getting their worth. And I think that a lot of times you have guys, who leave the sport that are still very much like who'd fought 20, 25 times under the UFC banner, who are still very much not, not sure how they're going to go about their lives after this. And I'm not saying that boxers don't do the same. Boxers get that a lot. I just think that there's a way higher, if you're very special in your sport, there's a way higher ceiling in boxing right now as it exists. Like you can make mega millions in boxing compared to MMA. There are guys who've held titles who I still, there are people who've held titles in the UFC that after their careers are still looking for that next gig because they didn't earn enough in their career.
Yeah, I mean, and to piggyback off what you said there, Chuck, like the difference in the payouts and which looks greener, keep in mind that at times when Dana White has sort of laughed off financial requests from fighters, remember him saying about John Jones sort of at times we would say, hey, he's asking for Deontay Wilder money. And it's kind of said as an LOL. Can you believe it? Can you believe this guy would ask for the kind of money that boxer Deontay Wilder gets? But then the reasonable follow-up question there is, who's better at their sport? Who is a better figure in their sport? Deontay Wilder in boxing or John Jones in MMA? And it's John Jones in MMA. Dana White has always been telling us, at least when he has an upcoming fight to promote, that John Jones is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, one of the best MMA fighters of all time. And to be like, can you believe this guy would ask for as much money as a boxer who's a couple rungs lower than that is actually getting? And to not only say, like, we're not going to quite pay him that much, but to sort of laugh it off as if it's absurd that he would ask for as much money as a worse boxer gets in MMA, that tells you something about the difference.
He used to be very cautious, and I know this is a little bit of an aside I'm talking about Dana White, like of smiting his chest too much, kind of showing you just how rich he is. And I know since the sale of the UFC and he's cashed in on his hundreds of millions and all that, he's been a little different. But I think over the last year or two, it's so much more unabashed. You're catching the shots of him on his private planes, and you're seeing this. I really wonder at some point how much just perception and like everything starts to catch up. And I don't know if it'll mean anything to all the fighters across the combat sports, but just you have this rights deal that'll be coming up. It'll be very, there's going to be a disclose. They're already talking about, how much, original content should draw in the market where they're in such a good place. You're going to be talking about such crazy figures, and to glaringly, and we'll see what happens. Like if they start to amend the Ali Act, and there starts to be big time shifts in how we're looking at boxing, and and as they get in it, we'll see how it all goes. But all of that added up, you would think if that point doesn't at that wake up fighters to be like, wait a minute, they're taking the lion's share of everything all the time, and we're not getting it. If it didn't happen then, it will never happen. I've said that before, but this is one of those weird confluences where you're getting a lot at once and a lot of numbers, and just the visibility of so much of what's going on are going to be bandied about over the next little bit of time. It'll be interesting, man. I want to see if I want to see how it plays out in terms of like the fighters' interest, because we're sitting here wondering how boxers would see this. How would boxers handle this? I mean, this is everybody at this point. Like, how is everybody going to handle this?
Speaking of boxers, we have some breaking news, guys.
Ooh.
As we were chatting here about this sport of boxing, we had Ariel Helwani update me via text about this little event here. The Ring Magazine Fatal Fury City of the Wolves card on May 2nd will take place in Times Square, New York, and feature 3 blockbuster fights. As we can see there, it is Ryan Garcia v. Rolando Romero. We have Devin Haney v. Ramirez, Teofimo Lopez v. Arnold Barbosa Jr. I mean, if there's any indication that this lad from Saudi Arabia has a few quid, I think it's things like this. My God.
I still don't know how that works. I mean, I'm guessing the specifics of how that's going to be set up, but man, what a nightmare. What a nightmare.
Yeah,
you go down there under ordinary.
It's already a nightmare.
It's already a nightmare. You go down there under ordinary circumstances and you feel like it's like, the end times, man. It's like there's so many people crashed in one place. I have no idea the logistics of how they're going to make that work.
Also, is New York is it? Are other people calling it the City of the Wolves? I don't. Like, am I missing something on the City of the Wolves?
That's like the Gulf of America. You either call it that, Ben, or you get off this call. No, I'm just kidding.
That's a new one for me. I don't. Are we talking about it will become the City of the Wolves when we have this boxing match in Times Square? I'd like to hear more about the wolf angle, is what I'm saying.
I just imagine the lads Saudi Arabian lads coming back from New York and they're like, oh, where would you go on holiday? Oh, I went to New York. Oh, the City of Wolves. It sounds amazing.
Well, the Big Apple's for cucks. I'm just gonna say it.
Wow.
Oh my God. This is absolutely insane. I don't even know what to do. Look, the card seems
that's wild. That is wild.
Is
now
outrageous.
I wonder, are they gonna? Did you say Teofimo's on the card?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Let me just get this tweet back.
Well,
yes,
because they were mentioning an Alcatraz fight too, which I was like, what is going on? Now we're just like holding events.
Yeah, we're going to get into some Enter
weird.
the Dragon. Everybody gets carted off to a billionaire's private island.
I love it.
Here pretty soon.
This is also crazy, dude.
We're going to put Ryan Garcia in a fight in Times Square, huh?
Oh my God.
We're gonna decide that's nothing could go wrong there.
There's not a lot of temptation around that part. I've been over there, and he should be fine.
It's gonna look cool, right? Like if it is what, like I'm imagining the ring, and then you have all the lights and the screens. That's what they're gonna go for here, right? Like it's not gonna be in some like in the script part of Times Square. They're like, yeah, it's just around the corner. All of those lights are around there, man. Believe us. Like they're gonna try.
It's
and
actually on 44th. Just keep going over there.
You don't think we're doing the M&M store? You don't think that's where we're going to try to set up shop?
How are you going to deal with all the sponsors, right? Like if all these stores are all over the place, that's hilarious. Jordan has just given us some information here. I believe this was referring to the City of Wolves. Is it, Jordan? Just give me a nod there. I know you're busy over there in Florida, but if you just give us a little nod. Oh, so it's the same promotion as Eubank Ben, and it's a video game, The City of Wolves. Looking forward to checking that one out. Thank you very much, Jordan. Don't really know if I got that right, but I'm very glad he brought it to our attention. This is a wild time, lads. I mean, every time they announce something, I'm just like, what the fuck? What is going on here? That is absolutely insane. Let's get back to the subject at hand.
Let's get you to the apex. Let's center on the apex for a minute here.
I need an apex event to cleanse me after this news. If something were to happen, right, and I know this is a boxing conversation in terms of the Ali Act, it does not exist in MMA, but if this was to happen in boxing, would this be a massive step back in terms of MMA fighters and their remuneration, something that we complain about all the time? Surely if we don't have, that to point at just across the way in boxing and saying, look what's happened over here. They get this much. They have to do so much more. There's so much more transparency for boxers, etc. Would this be a massive step back for not only boxing but MMA if these amendments were to happen to the Ali Act?
I mean, the idea that the MMA fighters were headed in a better direction before any of
Yeah.
this,
Yeah. Fair.
I can't quite say. It seems like they have not made any progress really on anything that would get them better pay, better treatment, any sort of like collective action. That's kind of what it would take. The two options that MMA fighters, that UFC fighters had to get themselves into a better position would be either antitrust, which we saw that case just get settled. That was another thing that sort of loomed over this TKO earnings call. Was you talked about all the money that they made over the past year, and then ended up with something like a net revenue of like $6.4 million, which seemed comically small until you remembered that they settled a $375 million lawsuit. And
Yes.
that's, there
Yeah,
is
the fact they
still
made money at all in the end.
right.
That whole
Yeah.
nutshell.
Yeah.
There is still one piece of that antitrust case that's still out there, and who knows where that's one's going to go. But once they settled that, that took away one threat that fighters might be able to have. I mean, that's what we've seen in other sports. That's how the NFL got a players association, was pursuing antitrust. And the other one would be just the fighters finding some way to collectivize on their own and form into a fighters association, which at this point, you just got to think they're not going to do. If they were
Right.
going to do it, they would have done it already. There were a whole lot of really turning points, these sort of forks in the road, where the UFC would introduce a new thing. When they took away sponsors, that one, I remember talking to a lot of people, managers, fighters, coaches, people like that, who were saying, this is it. If you lay down and let them do this to you without any sort of recompense, then that shows them that they can kind of do whatever they want to you. Because a lot of those fighters had signed deals saying, I'll get paid this with the understanding that you'll put me on main cards of pay-per-views, and that will translate to bigger sponsorship money for me. And then while you were still under that contract, the UFC said, guess what? The sponsors are going away. And there's nothing coming back to you to make up for all that lost income. And that's just the way it is. And when the fighters kind of took that on the chin and didn't do anything about
Yeah.
it, that was kind of it. And so it doesn't, they had some hope that maybe an Ollie Act expansion would get pushed forward. They thought they had a buddy in Mark Wayne Mullen, who had been himself sort of a MMA fighter at one point before getting
right,
elected
yeah.
to Congress and the Senate. But he's a hardcore Trump guy. And if Trump says, hey, not only are we not doing the Ollie Act expansion for MMA, we're taking it out of boxing, because my friend Dana White, who was kind enough to give me my own personalized walkouts at events, which definitely did not
With Kid
hurt
Rock.
my reelection bid. Yeah, I had Kid Rock coming out there with me. I owe him. I
Yeah.
mean, it's the TKO. They're saying we're not out there lobbying for it. They don't even really need to. They're saying it enough publicly. They can just trust that it'll go from their lips to Trump's ears. That he'll know my friends who I owe a debt of gratitude to would like this, and therefore I can lean on my party for this. And his party has kind of shown they'll do whatever he wants. I mean, you kind of look around at the way that American governance is headed. There's not a whole lot of pushback on what the big fella wants.
Oh,
So
man.
I'm not prepared to say that without lobbying, they could potentially just see a full repeal of the Ollie Act. It wouldn't even be in the top 10 craziest things that have already happened this year.
That's so sad. That's the saddest statement ever. Oh,
Do you ever just get like you just like a little segment of a conversation we're having and think back to like when we started watching MMA decades ago and being like, yeah, the president of the United States has his own walkout music at UFC events. Now you're like, what the fuck? What is out there happening here? Great, like, but oh my god, it's absolutely insane. We believe we can forecast that this
my Lord.
this conversation about fighter remuneration will get really jazzed up around the broadcast deal. It always does. A massive number comes out. We all go, guys, do you know what? Do you not think you should get some of this money? And we talk about it for a while, and it goes away. By
By the way, I do remember, Ben, when you were talking about that, I was like, it threw me back in time, because I remember you talk to fighters and they would all kind of quietly grouse about like, I'm losing 50 grand a fight because of this or whatever. They would all tell you this. And that's why I thought at that time, I was like, well, if it's going to happen, it happens now. Like you're taking money out of their pockets. And it just died down. I would say within like a year, it had just kind of died down. It petered out altogether.
Yeah.
It did. It always does, though, and I do expect it to get hammed up. At the broadcast deal, it's always such a big number, etc. And I believe they did have something to say about the media rights. Nothing very clear, similar to the boxing stuff. But let's have a go at that, Jordan. Let's hear what they had to say about the media rights.
We're currently in our exclusive negotiating window with Disney and ESPN. The window opened on January 15th. It lasts 90 days. When we look at the outlook for a renewal, I'd remind you that the market for premium content, despite ESPN shedding MLB and F1, is hot. It's quite strong. The content, our content in particular, TKO, is unique because not only do we own and control it, but it's year round. There's no off season. Our content, both at UFC and WWE for that matter, has urgency. And the urgency allows us to attract subs and viewers and also gives us a consistency to retain subs and viewers, reduce churn. Obviously, these are appealing attributes for buyers of content, particularly with the streaming services, which is what it's all about these days. When it comes to our overall deal, 1 package, 2 packages, half packages, 4 packages, NASCAR style, whatever it might be, we're focused on doing what's best for the business in the long term. So that means a balance between maximizing our reach and engagement and monetization.
Well, there you have it. I can remember the ESPN deal when that came in, and the amount of frustration that fans had with oh, you have to log in here, and then when the pay-per-view comes, you have to pay for that again. If you were pissed off back then, lads, it sounds like things are going to get very, very complicated towards the end of 2025. I expect it, and we heard Ariel speaking about it most weeks. He expects it to be this smorgasbord of UFC events across several different streaming outlets. It's going to be
worse
great
than the NFL.
Yeah.
Worse than all those. Remember when they were kind of, it was like Versus, and then they broke into Fox, but then it was like they had, what was it, Ion? He was like, hey, everybody's got Ion. You can find the fight nights on Ion. We've already kind of went through this. Sometimes on one individual card, they would have 3 different locations you had to go to watch a single card from post to post. So it feels like we might be entering a little bit of that area again, like where you're just going to have to, everything is just disseminated everywhere. Like, you know what I mean? Like ESPN has some, and Netflix or whatever. I think that's going to be the direction.
Yeah, but also, I mean, this is one of the things that the UFC and TKO through the UFC really can offer people, especially if you have a streaming service, whether it's, a newer streaming service or a streaming service that's newer to offering live sports. And, they all want to get into live sports because that is something that you can still reliably sell advertising on, because people are going to watch it at that time. As he said, about the WWE and the UFC, they create urgency, which maintains subscriber bases. And year-round urgency, no off season, no, hey, I'm going to subscribe to Apple TV when you got a new season of Severance, and then I'm out until there's a next one, but ongoing sort of recurring subscriptions that you get, sort of what ESPN Plus has gotten, where if you're an MMA fan, you got to have it, to watch the UFC. So you sort of set it and forget it, even if I don't care about this weekend's fight card, but I still, I'm not going to cancel my ESPN Plus subscription every month until there's, next week's that I might actually care about. And they do have that to offer. And if there's one thing you've seen about MMA fans, even though they're not as big an audience as a lot of other sports get, they will pretty reliably follow you wherever you go as the UFC. The real test is going to be, though, if they spread it out between 2 or 3 different subscription streaming services, a subscription package, something. And I agree that that is probably the most likely scenario here. At what point do you hit some kind of threshold where people go like, look, I'll follow this one if it has the big fight cards, or I'll follow these 2. But if you just put the fight nights, especially the Apex level fight nights over on this one, man, I'm not even thinking about it. I think that the UFC already has, without explicitly saying it, these different tiers of programming where you got pay-per-view at the top, you got a fight night event in front of an actual crowd in an actual arena down at the second tier, and then the bottom tier is what we got this weekend, where we're at the Apex and the card looks like we barely gave it a thought. And fans can look at that and they know Fighters know. Fighters can see which fight card they're put on and know what the UFC thinks of them. And so if you're going to spread those tiers out across different platforms, you are making it a little more stark for people to go, which ones do I think have value and which ones don't?
True.
And then
That's
you
so
get
true.
tuning out from a large portion of your content.
You know, I was just literally thinking about this because I did a piece on Esteban. How does he pronounce it? Yeah. He just had a fight of the year candidate at that Sphere card where, you know, he goes back and home with Zellhuber, and then he, you know, you would think that would sort of catapult him into this, like, okay, now we got to let the world see this guy. He's coming off of this. Instead, he's buried on this weekend's Apex card. I thought that was the craziest juxtaposition I think I've seen from a guy who, like, okay, he just pulled out one of the crazy fights. Like, literally, I think we Uncrowned called it the fight of the year, I believe.
Yeah, we did.
So it's like you go from that to buried on the Apex card. How does that work? I think it will be more delineated, as you're saying, Ben. Like, if they were to do that, if they were to say, like, okay, so the lower tiered cards are going to be over here on this channel, I do think that people would see it. Right now, because I asked him, and he's like, "Oh, it's just like a contender series. I'm going home in a weird way, that sort of thing."
Or going backwards is another way to think about
it. That's another way to look at it. But I think it becomes more clear that you're going backwards. I don't think that some fighters don't even associate this yet, but that would certainly make the association stronger.
Yeah, but I mean, the one thing I think we can all agree on is even if they do that, however they spread out their content on rights deals, they're going to make a lot more money. And when I remember when they were first talking about seeking a deal with ESPN, and it was around the time of the sale where we finally got a look into a lot of the UFC's financials. And I remember doing stories on this because when they sold to Endeavor, that first initial sale from back when it was Zuffa, the Fertitta brothers, and Dana White, and selling it to Endeavor, which later spun it off into TKO, we got a look via the investor decks that they had sent around trying to get people to buy in, because, of course, Endeavor didn't buy it all at that point, later bought it all. But the thing that they were presenting to potential investors was saying, look, we're up for a rights renewal, dear. The Fox deal is up here pretty soon. And timing wise, we are coming available when there aren't a lot of other sports options becoming available. The NBA won't be available for another 4 years or whatever it was. NFL's locked down for the next 5 or 6 years. If you're somebody new who wants to pick up some new sports, we're the only game in town right now. And so we're going to see a huge increase. And they laid out at the time what kind of a huge increase they were expecting. And I think a lot of us kind of saw that number and went, are you crazy? Like, that seems ambitious. It seems hopeful. And then they got even more than that, in the end from ESPN. And so it's like they're going to come around this time, whether ESPN picks up some or all of it again, whether they spread it out, they're again going to be saying, we want a huge increase, and they're almost certainly going to get it.
It feels like, right, you brought up earlier, Ben, and it's very relevant, like the fact that people are complaining about cards that are put out. Obviously, the UFC is still doing great. It's in a better place than it's ever been. But, 312, Australia, things like this, Montreal, even before they come, you have fans kind of forecasting, well, we're going to get this. It's not going to be a blockbuster card. There isn't a need to stack the main cards completely as we used to see. You're mentioning like different entities of the UFC and different streaming platforms that will put an onus on the UFC to create more products. They have lots of products, as we know. Dana White's Contender Series. You've mentioned the tiers of events they put on. Are we nearing a saturation point for the sport? Are we nearing a point where it's too available? It's everywhere. This used to be like punk rock. It's now like a U2 concert in front of 500,000 people or whatever, Do you think that's a risk going forward if this kind of thing happens, lads?
I don't know if it's like a long-term existential risk. I think one of the things, he mentioned, Mark Shapiro in that quote we heard earlier mentioned churn, that we reduce churn. And it's like, I understand that probably numbers wise, they feel like we basically end up with about the same number of subscribers going forward. But there is, I think, a higher level of fan churn in MMA and in UFC than you see in other sports. And some of that is just sort of natural to the kind of sport that it is. Because it's like, if you're a Cleveland Browns fan, you're from Cleveland, your dad was a Cleveland Browns fan, it's just sort of part of your life. It's there.
It's a sentence.
Maybe not the example I wanted to use there, but or me. I live in Missoula, Montana. I'm a Montana Grizz fan. Every year I go to some Grizz football games. They have good years, they have not so good years, but I'm gonna be back next year. Even if at the end of a
Right.
year I might be like, God, I can't believe it. I might be done with these guys. I'm gonna be back next year, and fight sports doesn't quite have that because you're not tied to it because you have an affinity for a team or a city or some kind of a history. It's individual, and those people come and go, and it's always been that way. So back to the bare knuckle boxing days, it's always been sort of a individual star-driven sport, and the UFC has managed to take some of that churn risk out of it by just making the brand so much of a star. But at the same time, I think they picked up a lot of new fans during the pandemic. I hear that from people all the time where they say, I started
same
watching
here.
this because I wanted to watch sports during the pandemic and stuff wasn't on. This was on. I watched it. I became a fan.
Isn't that sad? That's going to be the stroke of genius that Dana did in the end.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a real thing, but I do think
He saved the world, Chuck. Okay,
I know.
let's not. Okay,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ben. Sorry about that.
I do think, though, that you see a fair amount of fan churn just anyway, because people are like, I don't know, the people I got into watching who were the stars when I started watching, they're not really in it anymore. I don't know who some of these young guys are. Especially as people get older, they have kids and they're like, I don't want to spend every Saturday night watching a fight night card of people I haven't heard of. And they just kind of gradually tune out, but new people tune in. And so I think you end up with around the same number, but it's also the thing Ari Emanuel had said, a year or two before, is that they felt like their added genius for the way they structured these deals for the UFC is taking what he called the lumpiness out of the business, which means we got a rights deal that pays us whether people watch or not. ESPN pays us for putting on an event. Doesn't have to be a great event. Doesn't have to be an event people are super excited about.
Yeah.
We put on the show, we get paid. We put on a show people really, really want to watch, we might get paid a little more. But either way, we are profitable and we are making money. And so that changes the incentive structure for the UFC.
Yeah. Just point in hand, like who's the main event this weekend at the Apex, Ben? Just without.
It's Manel Cape versus a guy with the long name.
He's
See?
exactly
Content.
right. He's exactly right. He knows
I'm not
exactly what's going
wrong.
on.
I'm not wrong.
That is correct. Yes. Damn, I thought I was going to get you that time.
It's like number 6 versus number 9 or something in the one of the like least excitable divisions for a lot of fans. I mean, I'm not saying that least excited, like they put on bad fights. The flyweights put on great fights, but as far as fan interest, it's one of the lowest divisions.
Yeah. I will also say, Petesy, just to piggyback real quick off of what he's saying, just the association, like so DraftKings and all the different gambling entities, and especially DraftKings, which partners so much with the UFC. Don't think that doesn't play a huge role in just you casually tuning in. You throw money on dudes, you're going to probably at least stop in on wherever it's playing just to see that fight, because the people love gambling these fights because it's 15 minutes. It's such a quick hit, boom, boom. They can just bet something and move on. I know tons of guys who do this. So that aspect is new. That's new from even the original ESPN deal. So it's just something else. Like, I don't know how they track numbers. I don't know if it's like how long you sustain or how long you on the on the stream or whatever it is, but I know people will just come in, hey, that fight's starting, let me get on it, and then a bunch of people jump on it at that moment,
Yeah, I'm personally looking forward to Manel Cap versus Man with Long Name. I think he has a serious chance in this one.
Amabeyev, is that his name? It's something like that.
I prefer dude with long name. Is right.
Dude with long name. That's his native name.
Before you go, Jesus Christ. Eubank Ben is the talk of the sports world here, right? And I was wondering earlier, like we're talking about how much transitions over to the US. Like, I mean, has there been a big buzz over there for this, Chuck, with all of the antics from young Chris Eubank?
I've seen it a million times. I don't know about Ben, but I've seen that footage everywhere. In fact, it was so good because you got it was so genuine, right? Like the dude's so mad. Like he's so mad.
He's so pissed off, man.
It was great. I thought, like, in terms, we've seen like some kind of calculated, blow ups at these things. You see bottle toss, you see that stuff. Yeah, but when somebody brings an egg and whaps it upside your head, that's a brilliant table setter for me.
It is, and especially like that's the thing. Like you asked if it has made waves over here. It's the egg incident that
I know.
that has really pushed it into people's awareness. And I love. I was looking at this story earlier that we have over on Uncrowned by the big homie Darshan, where he's talking about the Chris Eubanks addressing the whole thing. And my favorite part is him saying like, "Would I do it again? Absolutely."
I like too that the next time he's coming in, they're like patting him down and wanding him and all
they
that
had
shit.
they had the egg detector. It says
Yeah.
egg detector on the wand. Like that's where we go from just a funny moment to true fight promotion
pissed.
genius.
It's fantastic,
He
man.
was pissed. I saw the still shots of him just like it's like
He's
never seen him
frothing
so
at the
mad.
mouth. Like
I know.
he's
Just so good.
Do you know what's
It's
so
so
funny?
good.
It's like an ego death from Chris Eubank, because I think a lot of people didn't like this idea, and they both have this kind of status of this young guy coming along, riding his dad's coattails, becoming popular, getting opportunities. But when he's sitting up there saying, "Look, they don't like me. How does it feel to be like me? Hey, Ben, you're like me now. Everyone hates you." And I don't think Ben has had that ego death yet. And he's making him sit through this, like in front of a crowd of people who are there to see this man being dressed down for a failed drug test. Chris Eubank's just like, yeah, I don't give a shit. And that has turned him into a babyface here.
Mm-hmm.
He somehow has gone from like this guy, take him or leave him. I know when he fought Beefy Smith, a lot of people were up for him. And then he wins that fight, and now he's here. And just suddenly, he's like become his dad. Do you hear him talking about the Louis Vuitton jacket and all
Oh,
this
God.
stuff? Like he's I used to look at them and go, oh, it's funny the way he doesn't quite have his dad's kind of doesn't have the same thing going on. But somehow in the promotion of this fight, he is just becoming his father. It's absolutely incredible. And I can't wait for
man.
Yeah,
It's
really,
crazy that it's 2 months away. If
Yes.
anything, that's the worst part about it, right?
Yeah, it's insane. So what are you guys gonna check out the Davis fight this weekend? Or are we just gonna lock into the Apex? What way he's gonna operate here? That's what I want to know. Ben, look, I know he's pretending. Ben's that most hardcore dude you met. He's gonna be up till all hours watching this Apex card. I know it, Ben. Don't lie to me.
You know what? It's my daughter's 10th birthday this weekend, so we got some celebrations planned.
Happy birthday.
I
Yeah.
like to, especially with some of these
10.
Apex cards.
Crazy.
I like to circle back. I'll circle back on Sunday morning. They make you sit through so much filler when you watch these cards live, because it's just, they're never going to do more than 2 fights in an hour. We're throwing it back to the desk. We're running these video packages. You also know going into an Apex card, you are going to see this same advertisement at least 50 times until you're hearing it in your sleep. All that kind of stuff that, especially if you're not super invested, like where I need to know exactly when it happens, I need to see it live. You can come back Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and peruse through it at your
I was going to
leisure.
say, and you very selectively like pick
Right.
out what you want to watch.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to watch all of it.
And you'll hear if somebody has a great fight on the undercard that, if it was one that wasn't exactly circled for you, but they ended up putting on a great performance, you can go check that one out. But you don't have to. You don't have to sit through them all.
I actually quit the Apex last year. I was just like I remember I was just in the middle of the night. I'm up till 6 a.m. watching this shit. But it was I can't remember the particular event, but I tweeted at the time. I was like, I can't fucking do this anymore. This is ruining
I
me.
know.
They broke you. They broke Pete.
Finally.
I was just on my couch just going, what the fuck is my life?
I'm surprised you lasted that long. I think it broke me several years ago. I don't know how you lasted that long.
Boys, I'm having a great time here. But before we go, I believe we have a super chat, Jordan. See? Crackheads? Look at me interacting.
Look at this.
All right, here. Don't know if this is a dumb question, but could the UFC use the new boxing league in their US TV rights deal and try to package them together? Ooh. I mean, well,
That's
that is quite an interesting question.
I guess it would depend timing wise, because right now they're in the exclusive negotiation period with ESPN. He said, I believe that started with January 15th, maybe, and runs for 90 days. And so during that period, we're just talking to ESPN about it. And the rights deal really kind of like comes up for, like, the new one would begin later this year. So it could be something that you're teasing out there, but you're also asking somebody to sort of buy into something that they haven't seen yet.
Yes.
You're telling them
True.
we will have a boxing league. They also probably are going to be savvy enough to be like, haven't you said that before, though? We saw the T-shirts. And so I don't know how big a role that will be able to play in something. I would be, frankly, I hate to even say this, speak these words out loud and desecrate this show. I would not be surprised if they try to work up a little something for the power slap in some of these deals. We'll say like, hey, we'll let you have fight nights and we'll even sprinkle on a little power slap, whether you want it or not.
We'll even sprinkle it on. Nice. That's it. That's a tipping point for me. I'm in.
It's interesting you mentioned ESPN though, because there's that whole Top Rank situation there now at the moment with the buff, right? Like they're looking at the FBI investigating them for the links to Kinnan and stuff like that. Crazy,
oh, man.
Crazy sport, man. Boxing is just fucking wild. We have egg detectors, fucking lads fighting each other in Times Square. God knows what will happen next. But thank you so much, boys. It's been a pleasure as always. Ben, enjoy your gallivanting. Look at him. You can see it in his eyes. He cannot wait to gallivant.
He's ready to crack his first Pacifico right now. Look at him.
I'm a world-class gallivanter, I'm telling you.
He's going to gallivant the fuck out of the place as soon as it's over. Chuck, fantastic as always. Ben, fantastic as always. On air, Jordan, you're a beautiful man. I hope Florida goes well and you get to meet your heroes. Won't mention their names. Might have just landed there a couple of days ago.
They might have just stepped foot for the first time in 2 years.
Aaron Rodgers. These two lads, I mean, it's unbelievable. Oscar Lozev, thank you very much. Crackheads, we love you. See you next week. Mwah!